Giving Tuesday is a worldwide movement each year on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving in the U.S. to inspire a day of giving, unity, and philanthropy to support causes you care about.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about, the day after Thanksgiving, generally in Casa del Ruble is Christmas decoration time.
Oh, okay.
So in a way, I'm giving a pound of flesh because that is not
That's not your scene?
Yeah, well, it's my sacrifice. Also burn off some of the calories. But yeah, there's a lot of climbing around and a lot of, hanging of the lights and putting up of the tree and all that good stuff. But I can't imagine, this is a much better way of giving and showing that support without having to potentially fall off a roof.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. And I don't think you have to do anything more than send a text. You text give to MCA to 41444 to donate. That's on Tuesday, December 2nd.
Yeah, just send the text.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably send a lot of texts that I wish I could bring back. And there are some that I'm like, why am I wasting my time with this? This is not going to be one of those.
No, this is a good text.
Yeah, if I send give to MCA to 41444, I'm going to feel pretty good about myself.
That's right. You make a good donation to support our programs.
Yeah, and this stupid phone that cost me hundreds of dollars finally is paying off.
That's right.
Yeah.
Make it worth something.
Make it worth something. Yeah, and these things, this kind of donation, this kind of support goes directly to the professional development of today's Marines, which is huge. And we've talked about how in the Marine Corps, we're really pushing for self-study, for this professional growth and development, because we don't have the same sort of churn that we had during the long war, right? And so you got to get your nose in the books. You gotta get your wargaming on. You gotta get your reps and sets somehow.
Yeah.
And by texting give to MCA to 41444, it's gonna put the tools in the hands of the people that need it the most.
And that's on Tuesday, December 2nd.
Yeah.
Giving Tuesday.
Giving Tuesday after Thanksgiving. Eat your food, stuff your belly, and then burn it off by texting give to MCA to 41444.
Sounds like a plan.
It is. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 220. This week, we welcome Douglas K. Daniel to the show. Douglas is a journalist who served for nearly 3 decades as a reporter and editor for the Associated Press and teaches journalism at Kansas State University and Ohio University. He's also the author of Kill, Do Not Release, Censored Marine Corps Stories from World War II, which explores the use of censorship in the Marine Corps during World War II. He uncovers a trove of previously classified material withheld from the public because of government and public relations concerns at the time. Douglas talks to us about his background in journalism, how he stumbled on this topic and the existence of combat correspondents, and how he came into this topic by researching various journalists who served as Marine combat correspondents during the war. The book is so interesting, and it is great to hear about the experiences of the Marine combat correspondents and the previously unpublished stories from World War II. This is episode 220. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for tuning in and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hey, Vic. How's it going today?
It's going well. It's a little rainy.
It is.
But, I'm diving into the trying to pseudo-homestead. I'm tired of paying grocery bills. And so this is a good thing because I was like, oh, man, the soil's so dry.
Farmer Vic.
Yeah, Farmer Vic.
Oh, I like it. What are you growing?
Successfully. We got peppers. So I realized that peppers don't do well in shade.
Okay.
So I moved them.
Gardening tips, listeners.
Yes. So you need plenty of sunlight for peppers. They were very sad when I moved them, which is like a thing that plants do. It's kind of crazy. They get traumatized when you move them.
Oh.
So I didn't just move the planter. I actually dug them out by the roots and replanted them.
Aggressive.
But now they're flourishing in the sun. We have 2 watermelon that are growing, but unfortunately those are in the shade, so those are not coming along quickly. But, we're getting into the winter, so they might just have to be eaten small. But anyhow.
So that's all you got. You're going to be...
We had cucumbers for a minute. I ate
them.
Ate one of the cucumbers, and we're going to... Oh, we've got cilantro.
It's going to be a long winter.
That's cilantro. So
How'd you
anyways,
do with your cilantro?
it's doing a weird thing. They're like,
This,
I-
this is a
yeah.
new level for us,
I
by the way, to be
expected-
talking gardening.
I expected like this almost like mossy, bushy sort of thing, and they're just shooting straight up in the air like these towers.
Okay.
It's crazy. Here's a funny, weird, not totally non sequitur, but I was speaking of food. Though, I was watching. I've been watching a lot of baseball lately, and one of the ads that seems to be reoccurring is a thing for a cutting board that isn't wood. But this woman is advertising it, and her whole thing was, yeah, I cut chicken for dinner on this wood cutting board, and then my husband got salmonella, and she's blaming the cutting board. And I'm like, actually, maybe you just undercooked the chicken.
Yeah. Like,
don't blame the cutting board for the fact you got your husband sick.
yeah, get a meat thermometer. So we've got gardening tips and cooking tips today.
Yeah.
Where are we going from here? I don't even know. I'm afraid.
We're gonna dive into censorship. How's that?
That's right. Well,
military
and
censorship, is that cool?
We're going to dive into censorship, and what is one of my favorite topics? Journalism. So
The isms
The
of
ism.
all
Yeah.
of isms.
it's going to be a big day for
Journalism.
me. Big
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Big. So,
Great.
yeah.
Well,
And on that note,
I'm excited. Speaking of censorship, we are on our. This is episode 211, and there's probably 211 opportunities for me to have been censored up at this point. So, free speech. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about journalism, military journalism, wartime journalism, and what is that balance between really continuing to garner support for a war effort and then truth and truthiness, and where is that, what holds value, and sort of where is that line, and to lead us in this discussion is the author of a wonderful, wonderful book that I really, I'm, as you listeners may know, I'm big fiction, sci-fi, very niche, like dystopian, speculative fiction connoisseur. So nonfiction, not necessarily my bag, but the way you creatively wrote this book, the book is called Kill, Do Not Release, Censored Marine Corps Stories from World War II. Extremely engaging, and I think that the author who we have here today, Douglas K. Daniel, sir, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be with you both.
Yeah, this is great. I think just the way that you crafted this book was so engaging, and it added that sense of intrigue about what is it, why is it, and you have the excerpts to show like where these things sort of came out to play, and it gave us an opportunity to juxtapose sort of our media consumption, which is so siloed and algorithmically
curated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Compared to a very human side of what gets released and where that line between truth and support and those sorts of things sort of play out. I think it's so well done. I really enjoyed the book so much.
I'm so glad you feel that way about it. You know, it's interesting to go back and look at media before the digital age, and to look around and try and find examples of that. I worry as a media historian what we're going to do 50 years from now, trying to find the stories that are being told today, but they're being told in a digital format that you wonder if they're going to be saved. We're very lucky, our generation, that we have all these resources at the National Archives, at the Library of Congress, at the Marine Corps History Division, that they've saved things, and they saved them on paper. And so for people like me who come along with questions now, 80 years later, about what was happening in World War II, we're lucky to be able to have something that helps provide answers.
It's wonderful that there are these organizations, whether officially affiliated with the Department of Defense or the U.S. government and others. I mean, we ourselves, I think we can shamelessly plug the Marine Corps Association in the effort of archiving and,
Yes.
and collecting. And then there's Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, the museum, obviously. One of the things that makes me think about all of this, we talked about World War II. One of my favorite visions that always sticks with me is at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that massive warehouse of all of this archaeological stuff that they've just sort of locked away. And every, you see the box that has the ark as he's wheeling it out, and then it pans back, and there's just, shelves upon shelves upon shelves of all this stuff that all these things probably have their own stories, and that sort of really excites the imagination.
I think that's what a historian really dreams of.
Sure.
Is finding that box, that crate that has something that nobody remembers or even knew about or they've forgotten about, and it's going to tell us something we didn't know. And I think I found that with the combat correspondence dispatches, and which is, of course, the basis of the book. But you poke around and get interested in looking at things, and fortunately, again, our government and our, taxpayers, those of us sitting at this table, we're trying to preserve that history. And so you need to have people who go in and look and cast a fresh eye on something and look around. I just stumbled on this material. I really didn't know it existed. I didn't even know the combat correspondence was a thing until I had done some other research and just kind of stumbled into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's a good place to start. So how did you stumble across it, and what was the genesis for this book?
Well, my background is in journalism. That's what I studied in college.
So you're also in the isms of the isms.
Oh, I'm very ismy.
That's why I'm so excited.
Yes.
So, but I've been in journalism since I worked on the college paper at Kansas State University.
Oh, nice.
And my career has been pretty much in journalism, either practicing it mainly for the Associated Press, or teaching it, which I did for about 9 years in college.
Did you have a focus, or were you just stories that are interesting?
My focus mainly was about the basics of reporting and editing. How to find information, how to present it to a wide audience, and whatever that audience might be according to the publication you're looking at. A little bit of magazine journalism. I had a 2-year stint where I was the articles editor of Boy's Life.
Oh, really?
Boy's Life. The long time magazine, now changed to a different title, but Boy's Life of the Boy Scouts. And I tried to tell students later on that it's all the same. Whether you're writing for 10-year-olds or for if you're writing for AARP, you're still trying to understand the audience, engage with it, and you figure out ways to do that fit that way. But as I say, I ended up teaching journalism, and part of my duties, of course, was to do some kind of research. And I was editing a collection of war correspondence that was like an 8 or 9 volume encyclopedia, and I had ended up with the Korean War. And in doing that, I started reading about the Korean War and about who was covering it. And one of the names that came out of that was a fellow named Jim Lucas. Jim Lucas was a correspondent for the Scripps Howard newspaper group, and won a Pulitzer Prize. That's what got my attention. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner. And when I was reading about him, it turned out that he went on to cover Vietnam. So now he's gone from Korea to Vietnam. And as I read a little bit more about him personally, he had covered World War II as a Marine combat correspondent and as a Marine public relations officer. He got a promotion along the way. And I became really interested in him as a person. I hate to say as a character. That makes it sound like he's some fictional being.
Sure.
Of course, you wonder when you can cover World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and just continue that. So in reading about him, I learned about what the combat correspondents were. My plan to do some kind of a biography of him didn't work out. But in doing my initial research, I came across a couple of the combat correspondents who were in their 90s and dwindling, of course, as the years went by. And in talking with them, I was interested in where I might find Jim Lucas's work. And one of the fellows I talked to is a guy named Millard Kaufman. and he was a public relations officer. Ended up being a movie screenwriter, nominated for an Oscar a couple of times. Probably, I think, his best movie that he wrote was Bad Day at Black Rock, if you know that movie with Spencer Tracy.
I'm afraid I do not.
Me neither.
Well, I do. I bet you know this.
I know Spencer Tracy, but
yeah, a great movie. You ought to watch it. But he also was one of the co-creators of Mr. Magoo.
Yes.
So
okay.
you always kind of wonder
Yeah.
how people come along. But he had started out, Mr. Kaufman had started off working for newspapers and ended up in the Marine Corps and having this role. So when I chatted with him, I was really more interested in Jim Lucas, a person he did not know. But I asked him how this whole CC thing worked. So he was very helpful, and I spoke to another fellow, Cyril.
Cy O'Brien.
Cy O'Brien, very well known around D.C. And so the two of them, again, up there in years, I wish I could have spent more time chatting with them. But they did not know of any place where the combat correspondence work was, except what you found in print.
Sure.
And I went to the National Archives, asked about this, and they poked around Record Group 127, which is the collection of Marine Corps records, and there's something like 4 or 5 million pages.
Whoa.
Talk about Indiana Jones.
Yeah, seriously.
What do you do when you're looking at that? And I also talked to the folks at the Marine History Division, who did have some material that was very helpful, but not much about what they actually wrote. So I went back and talked to Kaufman again, and he said, I can't believe the Marine Corps would throw that stuff away. He said, you ought to ask him about that. Well, time passed, like a couple of years, and I was doing other things and all that. And I was back at the National Archives, which is just north of D.C. I was working for the Associated Press in Washington at the time, and went back there. And my big mistake was I described this material as news stories written by Marine reporters. What I didn't realize is that it would be categorized as what it was, and that is news releases, press releases from the Division of Public Relations. For most journalists, public relations is something to be...
It's kind of a bad word.
It's a bad word. It's something to be skeptical of at best.
Yes.
And who wants to read public relations releases? Well, the archivist I dealt with my other visit came back and said, I think I found what you're looking for. And there were about 100 boxes of their original dispatches with their original markings and things that were scratched off and this and that. Stuff that was literally written on the sands of Iwo Jima and under fire, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, here we go. So I did a lot of looking at Lucas's stuff, but again, that just never quite worked out. So for really several years, I just had this kicking around and thinking, well, what could I do? And some of my colleagues said, what else is there to say about Iwo Jima, Tarawa, any of these, Saipan, any of these battles?
Marquee battles, right?
Has already been said. And that was kind of hard to disagree with. And then somewhere along the line, I got the idea, as I looked through these, things that always caught my eye would be one of these pages that would have a big red X on it. And written on it would be, kill, do not release. Sometimes, no, with an exclamation mark, or not used. And so those caught my eye, and that's part of the journalistic training is what aren't we seeing? What didn't get out there?
Right.
And so I started making copies of those particular stories. And in time, I thought maybe what we should look at is what they held back. And what would that tell us about not only what was going on in the Pacific, but what was the thinking behind not releasing certain things. And that also meant understanding what the rules are. And you think about what the time was. We're talking about the early 1940s. And that's what helped me then collect those, but also come up with a kind of a history of the Combat Correspondence Initiative. That's how I got into that. And as I say, it took a long time for that to all percolate.
So this is this is really fascinating. when we bring it into the modern day context, we had Luis Agostini on. We started with a Fallujah exploration of Fallujah, and we did a documentary style film. It was excellent. If you listen and you haven't checked it out, shame on you. It's on our YouTube channel. But he was a combat correspondent, Marine, in the Battle of Fallujah, and hearing some of his stories. But that is not the norm in many cases. Many times, if we have a combat correspondent, there'll be a public affairs Marine or a public affairs officer or a strategic communications Marine. Oftentimes, my experiences with journalism and reporting in combat was an embedded reporter from a civilian who we sort of had to chip read, who would come in and really have to rely entirely on the Marines for his security, because they had no training, no nothing. They're wearing a flak jacket that says press, and then they're there. And that process of distribution is completely transparent to us until it actually gets published or released. The combat correspondent, I think, follows along the same lines as what is articulated here in the book, except I'm even after talking to Luis, I'm not certain, other than having gone through the PAO, what that release sort of criteria was. And so this was such a fascinating exploration on sort of, and if you could talk a little bit about what you saw in the book as you're going through these kill, do not release, what was sort of what was the workflow first off?
The workflow was very important to how all this was going to work out.
Yeah.
And I suppose just a little bit of background, how this all came about. A lot of people would naturally assume that, and often it's been said, Pearl Harbor led to this. Yes and no. From what I've been able to find and different accounts, it was the summer of 1941. So we're talking about 5-6 months before Pearl Harbor, that everybody kind of knew the United States would eventually be drawn into the war, which had been on now since 1939. So the services are kind of ramping up what they're going to do, and of course how they're going to get people, the recruitment.
Right.
And so the commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, Thomas Holcomb, went to an old friend of his who was a colonel out in Washington State, and went to Robert Denig. Got him on board, and according to an oral history that the Marine Corps History Division did, again, God bless them for thinking ahead. This is
shout out to the History Division.
In the late 60s, General Denig was showing his age and couldn't remember everything, but he says he's called to Washington and he's with General Holcomb. He says, "Do you know what public relations is?" And he said, "No, I don't have any idea." He said, "Well, you need to find out, because that's what you're going to be doing." And by July 1, Denig had retired the day before and then was back in as a general himself, and was the head of the Division of Public Relations, which he knew nothing about. And like most smart people, he realized, well, I'm going to get an assistant who will know something about that. So he tracked down a young guy who had been doing PR for, I think it was the Commerce Department, and got him a commission. So they're kicking around ideas that's all aimed at recruitment. That was the key. How, again, they're going to be in a lot of competition with the Army, with the Navy. How do we, get young men to join up? And this is, again, well before Pearl Harbor. So they're kicking around ideas about this and that. And that's what Marine public relations really had been about for decades, and that is recruitment. They did have control over a lot of information that went out, the advertising, stuff like that, but it was all about how do you get people to join up.
I mean, most of the stuff that we see coming out of World War I was exactly that. The Marines are the toughest, we're the best, come be part of us. Yeah.
And that was, an advertising message,
right.
Understandably so. So somewhere along the line, before Pearl Harbor, they were kicking around this idea of what if we could get journalists, recruit journalists, and train them as Marines, not go the other direction,
right.
which is kind of what we've seen in our lifetime,
Yeah.
which is, oh, you get journalists and embed them. No, you get journalists, train them as Marines, and then they're assigned to various divisions. And their key point was not to write about the big battles, but to write about Joe Blow,
Yeah,
the guy at, the regular Marine. So that I grew up in spent a lot of my life in Kansas, in Garden City, Kansas. So here you've got this town of, I think back then it was about 12,000 people. How do you get their attention? Well, if you find some guy who's running the motor pool and you write a story about him, and here's how he's doing his share to win the war. And most people realize as they get older, no, you win the war with all the people who don't carry a rifle, the people who do all the support and so on. That's what helps make it all work. And so they thought that would be a great idea. Well, like a lot of things, that took a long time to get anywhere. So now you do have Pearl Harbor, but more important to this initiative, you have Wake Island.
Mm-hmm.
And we know a lot about Wake Island now, but at the time, there was very little coming out of the Navy, out of the Pacific, given the nature of communication then. So the idea of Wake Island holding on for days and days against this Japanese onslaught, which happened about the same time Pearl Harbor did, and it became this, for that time, modern-day Alamo. But there was very little information. You go back and look at the newspaper, and they're just very minor reports because they didn't have anybody there to do that. That was probably more of an impetus for the combat correspondents to take off, the idea of let's have trained writers and reporters with Marines so they can tell the Marine Corps story. By the spring of 1942, the commandant had given the okay to see if this would go anywhere. So Denig sent his lone sergeant in the division, I think it was him, his assistant, his sergeant, and a secretary, sends his lone sergeant around to newsrooms in the Washington area, the Post, the Star, the Herald, a couple of others, International News Service, and so on, and see if they could get anybody interested. And to their surprise, they came up with 10 people pretty quick. And the key to things were two things as a come on. One, you would not be behind a desk. You wouldn't be leaving the newsroom and then there you are.
In another newsroom.
In another newsroom doing that. It would be a combat assignment. And second, you would get rank. You'd come out of boot camp and assuming all went well and so on, you'd be a sergeant. Wow. At that time, from what I understand, it might take 10 years before you become a sergeant.
Oh, yeah, back then, promotion rates are pretty slow.
Yeah, and, what a deal. They also were smart to realize that being a non-com, you would have a more rapport with most of the people you're going to be writing about. You're not really there to write about the upper echelon. You're there to write about the privates and so on.
And including the other, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding the other big important thing that they had to do was include city and state where that Marine was from so that the hometown newspapers could pick that up and publish.
That was key. So when they did do these stories, whether there was the motor pool or some battle or whatnot, you had to include the Marine's name, would have the serial numbers so they could check that wouldn't be in the newspaper, but it would be so they could check, and their hometown. Often they'd have their parents' names. They weren't shooting just for the big city newspaper, the Kansas City Star or something like that. They were shooting for the high school newspaper, the church bulletin, anything where they could promote a Marine who was doing a good job and make that part of the conversation. Then obviously back then, since you didn't have television, back then, doing things in print was the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask about the...
it still is.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right.
I'm not biased.
Well, they created at the Division of Public Relations at Marine Headquarters in D.C., across the river in Arlington, they created a newsroom. In fact, they got an Associated Press guy who joined up and ran their newsroom and set it up pretty much like a newsroom would. The copy comes in, you have editors who look at it, they make changes, they decide where it's going to go, and you had these various regional divisions around the country where you would send stories. So, again, using Western Kansas as an example, you'd have somebody probably in Kansas City who would understand that market and would know, okay, this is somebody from Garden City, Kansas. We'd go to the Garden City Telegram, we'd go to the Hutchinson News, we'd go to the Wichita Eagle or the Afternoon Paper, the Beacon, and that kind of thing, and hammer away and get it out there. So that was kind of the copy flow. A key point, though, the first thing was to get it by the censor.
Yeah.
And the
That's
censor,
what I wanted to, yeah.
the censor
Now we're
was
into
the
it,
Navy
yeah.
censor.
And this is someone that's essentially on the ground.
Yes,
So
typically in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor,
right.
after this all, got rolling. And there's a very good biography that just came out this past year about Waldo Drake, who was the main censor for the Navy in the first couple of years of the war. The book, I think, is called Nimitz's Newsman, because that's who he was answering to.
Sure.
And he was a fellow who had a background with the LA Times. And from what that biography tells us, Hamilton Bean, I believe, is the author of that, a professor at University of Colorado, Denver. Professor Bean points out how Waldo Drake was managing to kind of piss off everybody, the civilian writers, because they felt like their stuff was being watered down, and also a lot of Navy personnel who felt like their story wasn't being told.
Right.
I think that book makes the point that here you have the great battle, the victory at Midway, and according to some, the Navy didn't get its due for that, and a lot of that was because the censor was tamping down things so that the information didn't really get out there. That allowed maybe the Army and, to kind of weigh in on just who did what. So you had to get the combat correspondents had to get their copy past the censors, the Navy censor, just like the civilians did. Although, big difference, they were answering, to, their commanders.
Well, to say one of the drawbacks of having rank is that you now fall under the chain of command.
Right.
Whereas, maybe a civilian has a little more leeway on, or at least a little less supervision on the outlets that they would be sending it to.
And as I understand the way censorship operated outside the United States, it's very different than something that's being reported about the war within the United States. But there was an overall understanding with news media back then that you didn't want to do anything that would hurt the war effort. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people wouldn't believe that today, but most news media don't, when they report on things that, say, the government is doing that is seen as harmful, that's not denigrating the country. That's trying to inform people about what's going on. You decide whether you care or not.
Right.
Well, back then you had to be careful about that. If memory serves, the whole incident with George Patton slapping the soldier, and I think he did it to two different guys, that was kept under wraps for a long time until I believe it was Drew Pearson, the Washington columnist, broke that story, and of course all hell broke loose, and Patton was in deep trouble over that. That's why you don't want to have so much freedom, because whether you like it or not, you can make an argument that you want to keep Patton doing his thing rather than sending him home because he slapped a couple of GIs. But then,
where's the accountability?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So this whole thing of censorship was something that the combat correspondents were supposed to be trained in. And Cy O'Brien made the point to me that he said they really couldn't tell us how to be journalists. We all knew what we were doing. And as far as national security issues, he said, I didn't know enough to violate that. And I'm sorry to say he was wrong on both counts, because if you read the editor's comments, they sound very familiar to those of us who worked in journalism. You've got the editor telling you need to do a better job of doing this and that and so on. So there was a lot of concern that some of the writing wasn't what it should be. Mm. And on top of that, there were times when they were revealing things that shouldn't be revealed. And I made a list when I was thinking about this of various things that they were told, back off. For example, malaria. You think, why would that be a problem?
Oh, that's interesting.
There was a funny story. Somebody had done a little poem about, I think it's called Atabrine or Atabrine.
Yes, yeah.
This tablet you took to ward off malaria. Mm-hmm. And apparently it tasted terrible. You'd turn yellow and that kind of thing. There's a funny little poem about it, and they would write about that. That all got scotched because as any stories about malaria got the X from either the censor, probably from the censor, but also back at Marine headquarters, because you don't want to tell the Japanese, your enemy, that
our guys are suffering.
Yeah, they're suffering from this, and it's taking this big toll. A similar thing, a couple of stories that talked about the impact of massive storms on an island. And say, blew down this, it, washed out the roads, it ruined our communication. You don't want to share that with the enemy.
For sure not.
Would they know about it like 3 days later? Probably not. But I don't know. It would seem to me that if you were planning and think, hey, storm just hit there, now's the time to go in, because when this happens, it disrupts everything. So why share that? So Navajo Indians, and I thought that's a curious thing. So there are a couple of stories.
Oh, because of the code. Yeah.
The code.
Reveals the code, yeah.
Reveals the code. And there's a story in my book where there's this thing about some person stopping this guy, thought he was a Jap. Keep in mind, listeners, Jap, that was the language they used back then.
Which is one of the interesting things.
One of the things they said.
Of your book, though, I thought so interesting. We were talking about the censor. We were sort of laughing about it in our meeting, was that they had these racial epithets that they weren't going to use, but yet they went with another one. Yeah, rather than just saying the Japanese or something like, oh, don't use this racial that racial slur is banned. Use this racial slur instead.
And it's so odd to me. It's like, I understand why they would use Jap because it was so widely used, but they would scratch out nip.
Yeah.
Which, again, you talk to people of that era, and that was...
Well, because of Nippon, that's what Japan is known as, Nippon. Yeah. So, I mean, not that makes it okay, but there's a lineage, there's a language evolution.
There's some context that makes it make a little more sense. It's not just a word intended to be hurtful, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
It is meant to be hurt. Obviously, as a military force, you're always trying to dehumanize enemies. Yes. It's easier to kill them.
Right.
But just the fact that the censors went with one over the other is just so
it's interesting that
weird to me.
They really backed off of using the word yellow skin, yellow face, that kind of the real animalistic, really dehumanizing stuff. They backed away from. But
a slur.
As you say, it's dehumanizing for a reason.
Yeah.
It makes it easier to do what you've got to do. But another thing was weapons. There's a long story in my book about flamethrowers, which is really kind of interesting from this one guy's perspective about how you use a flamethrower. And he'd say, we'd give him a squirt and melt his face off.
Oy.
There might have been a little concern about how brutal that sounded, the gore and all that. But the real problem was the flamethrower is an effective tool. Why tell everybody about that? You think about it, if you make the argument, I think it was true, that the flamethrower could be very effective. It's pretty dangerous too if you're the guy carrying it. You're now basically telling the Japanese, hey, take those guys out first because they're a bigger problem. So why give them that kind of information?
Right.
Something that we can all understand a little more is the idea of things like friendly fire. Mm-hmm. When I was talking to Millard Kaufman, I ran a couple of these things by him. And, you know, you usually ask questions even if you know what the answer is because you want to make sure that's the answer. And I said, so there's this item about friendly fire. You know, why would they not want that published? He goes, because Marines don't shoot each other. Well, they do, but we're not going to talk about it. And it's another item about Marines having, you know, what today we'd call PTSD, you know, shell shock. And he said, Marines don't go crazy. He said, remember, this is all for recruitment. Mm. We're not going to talk about those kinds of things because that's not what our role is.
Yeah. It was just such an interesting thing too, that there are these things that from a tactical level, having been on the ground, that are just really obvious to both you and the enemy that don't necessarily need to be articulated. But it is smart to be cautious and to be prudent about, but like, so example, like the flamethrower, as soon as an enemy sees a flamethrower go off, that's already, everybody already knows that's priority target. Yeah. You don't have to publish something, you know, in an article for me to go, oh yeah, I probably should take. It's the same thing like they said. I think it was in Vietnam, like second lieutenants and medics lasted like on average, it was like 2 weeks, because the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong understood, like, if a guy's got shiny things on his collar, he's going down. And if a guy's got a thing and he's helping take him out too, like, those are the ones that need to go down because that's going to really catastrophically affect that unit if you take out their leader or take out their ability to help each other, to provide aid. But it, again, you know, it is prudent, though.
It would be prudent, you'd think. I was surprised that there's a whole lot of stories written about souvenir hunting. Mm. And I could understand that, you know, I mean, after all, you're out there. My dad was in the Navy, and I still have some sword that he found somewhere. Okay. I've never quite understood the provenance of that, but I've got it. And, you know, there it is. A couple of things about souvenir hunting that's kind of funny and kind of not funny. But the funny thing is there are a couple of stories about guys, little items about guys who are creating souvenirs. They're getting pieces of white cloth and putting pseudo-Japanese things on and selling it as a real, actual a Jap flag. And things like that they're, you know, you think, we're not going to publicize Marines scamming each other. I can understand that. Yeah. But it's the sort of thing you'd see in a movie. Totally. That you go, oh, yeah, you know. Yeah. But the other thing about taking things off of the dead, it just sounds unseemly.
It does.
I think it also may be a war crime back then, maybe still today, that you're not supposed to do that. Yeah. And you're supposed to obviously we know this because it still happens. You're not supposed to, you know, mistreat enemy dead. Right. And there's a little item of a guy who was showing off his Japanese skull collection in his tent. And there's a line in there that the writer says, he says he really likes this one that he's put a helmet on because his expression looks like he's saying, "So sorry, please." You think, oh, they're just working all of this, you know, the dehumanizing stuff in here. But it really happened. And nope, no, we're not using this. They had an understanding that they didn't want Marines to look bad. And bad, sometimes you'd think, well, why would that look bad? It's kind of funny. It's kind of clever. But then you realize, well, you don't want them to look buffoonish. Mm-hmm.
Or barbaric.
Or let's look at the range there. There's a story about a couple of guys who managed to secure a crate of sake, and they're running along, they're dodging bullets, this and that, and they got there and they shared the sake with everybody. No.
Yeah.
And again, it seems reckless, would be my guess. The comments
well, and it
weren't
also
always
seems
clear.
Frivolous too. Maybe, like, what do you mean you're all sitting around
Getting hammered?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true too.
Well, but it's also, and this is such an interesting, and I definitely wanted to dive into this aspect of like truth and accountability, vice what's better for the effort. When we interviewed Sarah Classy, her dad, I want to say, was it Silver Star, or it wasn't the Navy Cross, but it was Bronze Star, maybe.
No, maybe it was Navy Cross.
Was it Navy Cross? She's I guess she works at the VA and does the one of the bulletins on there. But she was on our show. Her father was in World War II at Guadalcanal, and was an award winner.
I think it was Navy Cross.
Maybe it was Navy Cross. Basically, he maintained communication under fire. Crazy. And he was what we call a wire dog. He was a wireman. And so he was just running back and forth between the front and the rear to make sure that they had their lines of communication going. So he's awarded this. And his whole thing was, well, I left my pipe back there. That was his thing. Like, I don't know why I'm getting this word. I said I had to go back and get my pipe. And the only reason I highlight that is that these very human reactions to this unbelievably chaotic are very real things that are happening on the battlefield. So in the effort of prudence and in the journalistic integrity, like these stories, in some ways, they need to be told. For one, if there are atrocities, they need to be held accountable. Mm-hmm. But two, also, I mean, there's a certain level of I don't know, like a halo effect of sorts, or a glorification that occurs when only you're telling these like highly curated versions of these really awful things that are happening. This thing that we humans do to one another is just terrible. But you're glossing so much of it over along that to support the effort. So like, where is that line between like, we owe it not only as journalists, but as, people to tell the truth so people really know what's going on. But at the same time, we don't want to submarine this thing, because holistically at the 35,000 foot level, it is good that we continue this effort, because we can't allow tyranny and all these other heinous things that would occur if we weren't fighting this to continue to go on.
And we have that battle today.
Every day, yeah.
About if we say this, then you the big picture, I think, is you lose the support of the American people. Of course, a lot of people say, and I'm not sure it's quite accurate, that the news media caused public support for Vietnam to wane.
Right. The Walter Cronkite stuff, right?
That kind of thing. And the Pentagon Papers and this and that, which I think another point of view is, well, you weren't being told what the truth was. Being lied to was the bigger problem.
Right.
But
or maybe the way that you were conducting the war was the
problem. Bigger. Right, exactly.
The reporting of it maybe was just the second or third order effect.
Yeah, I mean, the whole, it's like, well, people want to be able to make a...
Right.
Now, at the time, as I understand it, when Tarawa was being fought over in November of 43, people were shocked by the casualties and by the deaths. I think it was a little more than 1,000 Marine and Navy corpsmen being
utmost savagery.
Exactly. Yeah. It was covered about 4 days, and I think the popular image is a place that's about the size of Central Park. I mean, it was just left and right. So. And it's Thanksgiving week back home, and people are getting the word. And I think part of the story along those lines is that Franklin Roosevelt understood people need to be ready. This isn't over yet, and it's not going to be over for a long time. And the shock of that. So you started seeing more reporting of the bloody stuff. You started seeing more images, still and film image.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was with the Marines
with
at
the Marines at
Tarawa.
Tarawa, and a lot of that footage was by Marine combat correspondent Norm Hatch.
Yeah. Technically, he wasn't a combat correspondent. He was a combat cameraman.
Combat cameraman. He had been a combat correspondent on the Leatherneck staff prior to that.
Right? Now, and I'm not saying what you said isn't correct because I don't know, but from what I read, this title of combat correspondent was not given out to anybody who wrote. There were some people who wrote who never got that title.
You're correct.
Once you were an officer, you were no longer a combat correspondent. You were a public relations officer. They call it PRO at the time.
Yeah.
I had to keep
seeing that
correcting myself on that. So to me, the combat cameraman like Norm Hatch, with whom I spent an afternoon chatting one time, he was a great guy. And there's a good book about his life and adventures out there too. But being a combat cameraman is a thing unto itself.
Sure.
Because you're, I think the idea is that cameraman meant you were doing moving pictures.
Correct.
A combat photographer, you're using still, if you're making that kind of distinction there. But they're all working, as I understand it, working for the Division of Public Relations. So when they put together a lot of the film he shot at Tarawa, and he was later doing the same thing at Iwo Jima, he said, we can't show this. You got bodies floating in the water and people, Americans dead. Showed Japanese dead, but you didn't show Americans and all that. And that they went to Roosevelt, and who said, people need to see this. And because there's going to be more of this, and we've got to get everybody on board. Also understand what you're fighting for.
Right.
So that's an important thing. Speaking of Tarawa, and the guy I got to like, Jim Lucas, he ends up writing this fantastic 14-page report from Tarawa. It got cut way back. And in my research and in his box of stuff, there's the original. And most of the stuff that got cut was about combat correspondents themselves, where he talks about, and he wrote in first person, and which was very effective for that. The editors said, don't write in first person. You're not the star here. Well, reporters have heard that for years. But
editors still say that.
They still say that. And the thing is, under the right conditions, first person is the most effective thing you can do.
It brings you right into...
But the big problem Lucas had with a lot of that story was when he was using names, a public relations officer with whom he was close friends was killed. And right there with him, a mortar blew up, killed him, and knocked Lucas out a bit. That couldn't be in the story that was going to be fast-tracked to papers because the rule was you didn't talk about casualties unless the next of kin had been notified. Understandably so, you didn't want to have that happen. Yep. So a lot of that stuff got cut out of his story. And in my book, I present the whole thing. And what was curious to me was in 1949, there was a collection of what was published by the combat correspondents. It's a nice volume. And they used the boiled down version instead of the original. And I can only conclude at that time that story was still considered classified. And it just went on from there.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how all of this came to be. The cover is wonderful, where you have, this Marine.
I love the cover shot. I do.
He's got, tarps off Tuesday. He's just,
And that's Cy O'Brien on the cover.
Okay.
Who in his later years did come back and write for Leatherneck.
Great.
On an ammo box with a typewriter, a field expedient typewriter. So what was the process? So clearly he has a weapon. You can see it there leaning up against, almost right up against the typewriter. And
great picture.
So Is it they fight, and once we get some downtime, then I got to bust out my typewriter and start going to work?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
When Lucas did his famous thing, he begins by saying, 5 minutes ago, we've finally secured the island of Tarawa and, this 4-day battle and so on. So they would do that when they could. A lot of the photos that I found, again, at the National Archives, thanks, again, the Marine Corps and had, photographers doing that. They have sections in their finding aid for combat correspondence. So I'm going through there and going, oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, that's all these people whose names and I've read and all. And well, there they are.
Yeah.
And they would carry around, I think the Hermes typewriter became the portable typewriter of choice because it would fit in your
lighter and
fit in the sack and do all that. And they would have paper. They would have carbon paper because they need to make copies of things. So they would find time. Sometimes it's a little misleading to read something and realize, well, that wasn't the day it happened. They're talking to Marines after the battle, sometimes days, sometimes weeks after the battle, sometimes even longer, where someone has a good story to tell. So they would find the time to do that and try and get their copy off to the censor in Pearl Harbor.
And that's, what we would consider snail mail. So you're just going to give it to the next, Jeep that's going back to the rear, like, hey, devil, hand this off. This has got to go to the, got to get in the post office box or whatever.
Herbert Marilat, who was the first public relations officer out in the field, he and the first CC, a guy named James Hurlbutt, were dispatched very quickly from Washington with I think the 1st Division to go to Guadalcanal. And that's before they really had their apparatus back at headquarters figured out. They needed to have somebody, in the pipeline to go there. And they talk about, hey, do all this stuff and try and catch the next plane out once they had Henderson Field under control, where you could get a plane out and do that. And then it's got to go to Pearl, then it's got to go here and this and that. On the biggies, like Iwo Jima being a good example, they worked very hard to get the copy back rather quickly. The Tarawa copy was another example of getting that back kind of quick, where they would, I think they were able to use some telegraph work in Hawaii. You couldn't use that just for anything.
Yeah.
But they could use, some of that once it had gone through the censor and made sure that, to tell us something we shouldn't have.
So telegraph would have been the fastest way, but probably the less.
I say telegraph or a phone line.
Oh, okay.
As much as you could do that.
Right.
But they really had to. They were very proud of the times that they could get a lot of copy back to D.C. in time. Even on the train from New York, the cable lines would go get it to New York, then take it down to Washington, and same thing with photos.
Yeah.
Wild.
Wild.
I've always done my reporting from an office.
Yeah.
And you get annoyed by the telephone ringing as opposed to the gunfire.
Yeah.
And the bombs exploding.
Well, I mean, having seen a little bit of myself, is that I couldn't imagine in the downtime that I had to now be like, oh, I'm on deadline, and then having I'm gonna take my boots off. I'm gonna smoke a ton of cigarettes, and I'm just gonna sit here for a minute.
Well, and think about our conversation with Vietnam combat correspondent Paul Thompson, who's just like, I'm gonna
legend,
I'm gonna get on a helicopter and be a door gunner, but I'm also gonna take some pictures and.
Well, Agostini said the same thing. Remember, Luis? He was like, he actually made himself sniper bait accidentally because he shifted into combat photo mode and was like, this is a great shot, and then they're like, get down, you idiot.
Well, you bring up something that a lot of people don't realize, the distinction here. If you're a civilian correspondent, you're not supposed to be out there shooting.
Right.
The CCs are Marines first. They are armed, and there are plenty of times when they put their typewriters down or their notebooks because they weren't needed to fight. And the combat photographers, same thing. They're up, as you're suggesting, they're up in a tree trying to get a good shot, and suddenly the Japanese realize there's a guy up there. Yeah. And they're shooting in, and one guy got blown out of a tree, survived. His big lament was he lost his camera. You know,
I get that.
Yeah, if you're going to do it.
Speaking my language.
But they were called on to do that, and there was a modicum of, maybe more than a modicum of pride to say, sure, I shot a couple of the enemy, because they were in on. They were certainly
Marines first.
Yeah, they were certainly targets. So they were there. That was a bit of a problem in the early going, because nobody really understood what was going on. They'd show up, and whoever was their commanding officer would just put them to work doing something. And the story goes that it wasn't until you started showing newspaper clippings, hey, look, I was in my hometown paper, that they realized, oh, these guys are here to kind of help us promote things, and they felt good about that. Another thing to mention about civilians, one thing that General Denig was very concerned about was the idea that they were creating a cadre of competitors for the civilian reporting, and that was not going to be the case. They were not there. They went around and talked to a lot of press groups to say, we're not there to compete with you. We're there to do something that you don't really want to do, right, and that will supplement your reporting. And they would make, the combat correspondents would make their reporting, their quotes, whatever, available to the civilians to use as they wanted to. I've seen stories, a lot of AP stuff and others, where in a story there'll be a quote from the combat correspondent saying, or a Marine telling somebody, he's telling the combat correspondent, it's kind of like this secondhand sort of thing. Right. That they were good sources. That caused some consternation. There's I think a funny story a guy wrote that's in my book, where I think it was titled, or I titled it, I Was There and Didn't See You, where they talk about some of these correspondents who would be in their hotel room writing as if they were, under fire, and they're getting their material from combat correspondents. Right. That seems pretty dicey.
That is definitely a legacy that has endured. One of the big things when I was in Iraq was you would see, we actually had some instances where reporting was going up because it was going through the AP wire, and then the people in the green zone would report on it. And so I actually got a couple phone calls like, you guys got in contact? Like, no. And so we had to unpack it, because they were reporting that there were units. One of them was being mined, had been in contact with the enemy, and there were all these reporting of casualties and things. And so then our command was coming what was going on down there? Nothing. And so it's that sort of thing, oh, you reported on this. I didn't see you here, actually.
And it, that shouldn't be happening. That's not the journalistic ethic that I was raised.
But
on.
it was just such a you got to get it out. You got to get it out, because the churn was just.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention. You're talking about how the sausage was made, as far as this book goes. A huge help to me was the fact that both the archives and the Marine History Division had kept copies of the Division of Public Relations Bulletin. And this was a multi-page item that came out usually twice a month. And it was like a newsletter. And it was supposed to be distributed to the combat correspondents in the Pacific. So everybody, it was something that, like most publications are supposed to, it has an audience that's trying to draw you together. And there'd be some things in there about, so-and-so had a baby, and this is going on, and so got this accolade and whatnot. There'd be some messages from General Denig or from Commandant Holcomb, or whoever took his place, things like that. But there was a whole lot of stuff in there that was about improving your writing. And in time, you could tell where the chatty, down-home tone started to get a little pissy. like, hey, we're tired of telling everybody you got to have X, Y, and Z in your story. It's not happening. And the stories and the photos have to come in together. That's not happening. And we're getting tired of telling people the basics of reporting.
I feel this all deep in my bones right now.
And somewhere
Best
along
podcast ever.
Somewhere along the line, they said they kind of dropped that. And I think it became pretty clear that you're chiding, scolding people who are in these adverse conditions.
Right.
Who knows what they have to do to get a new ribbon for their typewriter. And they're getting shot at. They're dealing with malaria and all this. And somebody back in Washington who gets to go out at night is scolding me for not capitalizing something. And they kind of realized, we got to let that go.
This isn't a good look.
Yeah. I mean, having spent most of my life on a copy desk, I can tell you that doesn't go over well. Just change it and hope for the best that they'll figure it out.
That's what copy editors are for.
Yes. Well, I know my journalism professor didn't originate this, but he said copy editors are the people who come out of the hills after the battle and shoot the wounded. So
I used to be a copy editor.
And having done it now for a long time, I understand that. And but talk about being under tough conditions.
Sure.
And to have all that. So they kind of backed off that and tried to make it more of things. They'd pass along things that you shouldn't do, or they didn't want any more of, like, we don't want any more stories about this or about that. I found it amusing when they come up with the human things, like no more stories about when you're interviewing the guy who says, and when he gets back home, he's going to ask his girlfriend to marry him, that kind of thing. And they said, it's turned out that gets in the paper. She didn't know, and now she's embarrassed and things like that.
Or she's moved on.
Right.
Well, already.
Oops.
Or
there's just not that into you.
One of the stories that didn't make it, and I made a chapter at the end of the book that was just kind of a collection of what I thought were tended to be humorous or human things that didn't really connect with much, except there were things that were just like you were saying, Vic, about the nature of war and trying to be a human being and all of that. And that's little funny things. And there's a story in there about a Marine private. I think he was in California. Anyway, he was all set to get his leave that Saturday off the base in California, and turned out that his clothes were a mess or something like that. So his sergeant said, "No, you can't go." And he said, "But I've got a pass." "Nope, you didn't do your laundry like you should have." He said, I'm getting married today." He said, "You're not leaving." So who shows up at the base but his fiancée? She comes in, gets his laundry, washes it, gets it all nice, and the sergeant relents and they go off and get married.
Too funny.
Oh boy.
I thought and this is like
a setup for the future boy.
That's right.
Not used. And I thought, well, of course, is that, hey, you're either too tough or he gave in or this or that.
Yeah.
To me, it was, again,
it's a cute story.
It's a cute story.
It's a very cute story.
And out of curiosity, and again, you've got everybody's name in there, and it's in the book. I kind of figured these people are gone. In fact, I made a point I thought, I wonder if they're still around. So I looked up and I found them through Find a Grave, and they were buried together.
No way.
They were married all that time, and I thought, well, that's nice.
That's such a good story.
Maybe that was the last time she ever had to do it.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
But they were married all that time.
Oh,
I mean, it was a long time. It was decades.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Aw.
Well, so this has been such a great exploration of this really sort of interesting aspect of war and correspondence, and then of what goes out, like all of this stuff that's compiled. I mean, hundreds of boxes of stuff.
Discussions we still have about those same images in Leatherneck, because we do go from time to time. We have some freelancers who specialize in this, going to the National Archives and gathering some of those images and curating photo stories. And when you were talking about the souvenirs, I'm trying to remember now if we ran that already or not, or if we're just putting it together. I think we did run that, but we had to have a very deep in-depth discussion about what's okay in terms of battlefield souvenirs. What pictures are we going to publish? Because, what does that look like? Even though it's all these years later, what does that look like to people looking at that? What effect is that gonna have, and how does that make the Marine Corps appear?
Well, and in Okinawa, for example, because you had such a heavy civilian population, you had people going through houses, and there's a story about going through and pretty much looting this house. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to run that, understandably so. One thing, I hope people don't get the idea that this book is a collection of Marine Corps bad stories. That's not the case at all. It's interesting when they have stories that you could argue seem innocuous, and also even heroic. There's a couple of stories. News people, no matter what their training is, they're Marines. I understand that, but they also understand what a good story is.
Newsworthiness. Mm-hmm.
Good story may not make somebody look good, but it's a good story. And there are a couple of these stories about people who would go AWOL. They'd leave their assignment on a ship. Two guys in particular would then get on an outboard boat that was a supply boat. They go in and they join the fight and spend 2 days fighting. They come back. Of course, they're in trouble. But there was also a little hint that, they're not in that much trouble because what they did was great. And as somebody wrote on there, we can't publicize people disobeying orders.
Right.
But there's one story where a guy did just that. I think he was a Navy person. He was a sailor, and he ended up getting a Silver Star. So apparently they let that one go.
Yeah.
At least, I don't know about that story, but they let go the fact that, they found, it's kind of hard to knock this guy. So this is about, I think, that's why there's censored stories. It tells you something about the Marine Corps that, and about Marines and about Americans and human beings that at the time wasn't going to enhance the image of the Marines or the image of Americans or the war effort, but needs to be known.
Right.
And I think you find that later in memoirs, like with the Old Breed.
Yeah.
And Old Breed or Rare Breed, I forget.
Old Breed.
Old Breed, yeah. So you're going to find these stories in memoirs and in history down the road.
Right? Like
that's my one complaint with this whole thing is that the Marine Corps, they set the table a little too grandly for themselves. They wanted to promote the Marine Corps. Roger that. They wanted to have a first draft of history. Sounded good. And they wanted to, make that available. Well, the first draft of history went out the window when they said they put all this stuff under wraps for so long, and then pretty much nobody knew about it. So I think they had the right idea, but they found, like most civilian media do, you can only go so far when the shooting's on.
Mm-hmm.
And then after it's over, go back and understand that. And I think that's an important thing for the Marine Corps' oral history program and those other services to do those sorts of things so that you get what was happening with the perspective that only time can allow.
Well, one of the things I've really appreciated about this book is that you don't tell us how to feel about this. You're just presenting sort of what was going on. Like, here's the good stories. Here's the bad stories. The one thing they all have in common, they got axed. So you understand that there was a censorship effort, concerted, very focused and direct censorship effort. Understand that existed at the time, and then you conclude whether, I guess the thing is, and, we led off this conversation with like, where does truth undermine the cause? And when is truth not the cause? When is the seeking of truth not the cause? Or when is it getting away of the cause? And you don't tell us. You're not slapping us in the face with that. You just explain that this was something that happened at the time.
And why was it happening?
Yeah.
And that's, to me, what the historian tries to do is say, why was it this way? And sometimes it's not real clear, like the story about the guy in his laundry and his fiance. Why would that be a problem unless they just thought, and that can be regular old editor's judgment that didn't think it worked. But other things...
obviously, flamethrower in the face. I get it.
Yeah, it sounds so brutal, but it's. I'd like to think this again shows a slightly different side of things and how it all worked.
Oh, that's really cool.
And also, I think shows you a different kind of courage from these particular Marines.
Sure.
Who they're out there trying to get this story and do these things and still be a part of the fighting force, and how they had a unique assignment.
Well, I think it's totally cool. And it was just such a different era. Not to say it was better or worse, but it was just so different that you could go to newsrooms and actually get 10 people to I'll go to boot camp and be a Marine and then go fight while I'm reporting on the war. Obviously, we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's plenty that want to report on it. There's not too many that are like, all right, well, I'll see you down at Paris Island, sucker. There's not too many guys that are going to do that.
So where can people, is the book out now? Where can people find it?
Oh, yes, the book is out. Probably the easiest place to find it is on Amazon.
Okay.
You can buy it through the publisher as well. It's Fordham University Press. I was very pleased to work with them and have their okay to go with that. And some good photos, too, that show these guys.
I love the photos.
Everybody with the typewriter.
Yeah, I love the photos, and I recognize many of the names of the correspondents in the photos. These are kind of leatherneck standbys. The book Kill, Do Not Release, Censored Marine Corps Stories from World War II by Douglas K. Daniel. Go out, get yourselves a copy of it. It's a great book.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for coming
joining
and
us.
sharing.
Thank you for inviting me to come over.
This is really great. Thank you so much.
Hey, Vic, I got a little known fact for you.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Did you know that I like to shoot skeet?
I did not know that.
Yeah. I'm really bad at it, but I think it's pretty awesome. I probably could use a little practice.
Yeah, I did it once. When I was a battalion XO, my CO was huge into it. And so he would take us clay shooting, and I fell in love with it. I only done it once. It was only that one time, but it was so fun. So fun.
Okay, so I have a great idea.
Wait, hold on really quick. How's your calendar space look, though? Like, are you pretty full for the next couple months?
Not too full.
How about November?
No, I got some openings in November.
21st, right before Thanksgiving?
I think November 21st, I'm wide open. Why? What do you got? Something to suggest?
I heard, that just through the, a little bird told me, that the Marine Corps Association is actually hosting a sporting clay shoot for the Marines on the 21st. So I'd mark your calendar if you've got it.
That's awesome. So do you have to be a beginner, or can you be a beginner? You have to be an experienced shooter?
From what I've been told, whether you're a seasoned shooter or a beginner, it's a great way to spend the day outdoors, connect with others, support a cause that makes a difference for Marines. That's huge, right? We're big into supporting causes that help benefit Marines.
I think that's great. And so what are they going to do with the proceeds for this? Is this for charity or?
It actually, it'll stay in house, which is a form of charity. I mean, we are a 501(c)(3).
Yes, we are.
And but it won't it's going to line my pockets. Like Vic Rubel's not going to the bank with this thing, but it will help support professional development programs that help Marines succeed in their careers and beyond, not just in their careers, beyond their careers.
That's really cool.
It's huge, right?
Can you go as an individual? Do you need to have a team? Do you know how that works?
The way I understand it is there are team spots, there are sponsorship opportunities available, but they will fill up fast. If you are an individual, just go, or go to McClays. That's MCACLAYS.givesmart.com. Register, and
that's where you're going to find all the details.
You get the info there. Go ahead and register. Sign up. I'm sure it's like golf. If they need a foursome, they'll add you to the team.
Ooh, that sounds really cool.
I think it's very cool. I loved clay shooting. It was a lot of fun. I think this is a great way to give back and to have a great time, like I said, outdoors.
Yeah, it's a great way to spend the day outdoors.
Pull the trigger.
Break some clays and get a little time away from the desk. I like it. I'm going to look into that.
Awesome. Let's go. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.